Welcome to the Eternal format, the unofficial format where every set is legal, from the original base set to the most recent set, with the ban list to keep things balanced. To learn more about the Eternal format, check the links in the description. At first, we're going to be looking at Alcremie with Ditto. Alcremie has the attack Rainbow Flavor, which for 2 colorless energy does 10 damage plus 40 more damage for each type of basic energy attached to all of your Pokemon. The way that we are able to make this attack do a lot of damage is with Ditto, which has the Prismatic Body Pokebody, which says each basic energy card attached to Ditto provides every type of energy, but provides only one energy at a time. So, let's say we have Ditto on our bench, and this Ditto has a basic energy card attached. Prismatic Body will make it count as every type of energy as once, and since in the Eternal format there are 9 types of basic energy, namely Fire, Water, Grass, Psychic, Lightning, Fighting, Metal, Darkness, and Fairy, Rainbow Flavor is going to do 40 times 9, which is 360, plus 10, which is 370, which currently is enough to knock out pretty much anything in the format. This is the list I'm playing in today's game. This list was built by Piano Lake Pit. It relies on double colorless energy and twin energy to attack with Alcremie. And in order to attach the additional energy to our bench Ditto, we're gonna mostly use Raihan when we're not able to attach it on the first turn. Raihan is a supporter card that can only be played if one of your Pokemon was knocked out during your opponent's last turn, and it allows you to attach a basic energy card from your discard pile to one of your Pokemon, and then if you do, you can search your deck for any card and put it into your hand. This deck in particular chooses water energy for its basic energy. This is because it can sometimes be useful to attack with Radiant Greninja, which is here mainly as a support Pokemon with the Conceal Cards ability, but it also has the attack Moonlight Shuriken, which for 3 energy is able to do 90 damage to 2 of your opponent's Pokemon, which sometimes is worth it even though we have to manually attach 3 energy without pretty much any acceleration outside of Raihan. Just for the sake of history, here is an earlier build of Alcremie with Ditto. This was built by Seafea, which was actually the one who discovered the synergy between Alcremie and Ditto. This list opts for just basic grass energy, which is accelerated into play by Cherrim, which has an ability that allows you to attach as many basic grass energies as you want from your hand to your Pokemon that do not have a rulebox. So this includes both your Ditto on the bench and your Alcremie in the attic spot, which is going to be powered up by basic energy instead of double colorless. Next, we're going to talk about Swoobat Mill, which is a deck that was built by Spooky Hat and played in this game by Glacial. Swoobat has an attack that discards the top card of your opponent's deck for each psychic energy attached to it. In this particular list, Swoobat is not the Pokemon that attacks, but instead it is Alakazam Star. Alakazam Star is a Pokemon that has the skill copy attack, which for 3 colorless energy allows you to discard a Pokemon from your hand, choose one of its attacks, and if Alakazam Star has the energy necessary to use that attack, it copies it. So the idea is to attach lots of psychic energy to Alakazam Star while having a Swoobat in hand, then use skill copy, discard Swoobat, and mill a ton of cards from the top of the opponent's deck. To attach those energies to Alakazam Star, we use Gardevoir EX, which has an ability that you may well know from Standard. It allows you to, as often as you like during your turn, attach a basic Psychic Energy card from your discard pile to one of your Psychic Pokemon in play. That Pokemon takes 2 damage counters, and you can't use that ability in a way that would knock out that Pokemon. And we have another Gardevoir, which basically doubles the amount of energy, because it has an ability that makes each basic Psychic Energy card attached to your Psychic Pokemon provide 2 Psychic Energy instead of just 1. So, before we move on to the game, I want to spend a couple of words on the simulator that we used in this game, which is Twinleaf. Twinleaf is a simulator that does the card actions automatically, just like PTCG Live does or PTCGO used to do. It is built by the community, and it is not constrained by the expanded beta card pool of PTCGL, but instead it includes many cards throughout all eras. In particular, it does contain many of the Eternal staples and the Eternal relevant cards. Not quite all of them, so it's not quite ready for tournament play, but for casual play I definitely recommend you give it a shot. And if you're interested in adding some cards or fixing some bugs, Twinleaf is completely open source, so you can, if you're interested, do some contributions. In particular, Glacial, my opponent in this game, is a major contributor to Twinleaf. So, moving on to the game, in this game Glacial went first, and I started with Ditto, and my opening hand is quite bad, as you can see, 3 Alcremie, which I cannot use. Yeah, my opponent started with Mr. Mime with a quite serviceable hand. So in their first turn, they play Mysterious Treasure, discarding Psychic Energy, getting ready for Gardevoir X. And with that, they grab a Ralts, which they put onto the bench immediately, and then they end their turn. On my side, my top deck was Radiant Greninja, which is useful because the Conceal Cards ability will allow me to draw a couple cards since I do have an energy to discard. Then I play Luxury Ball. Luxury Ball is a staple of the Eternal format. It allows you to search a deck for any Pokemon, excluding Pokemon level X, but you can only play it if you have no other Luxury Ball in your discard pile. So basically every deck will run it as one-off, and this deck does not run Pokemon level X, so I can search for basically any Pokemon. And my plan here was to search for Lapras in order to get a supporter to get a new hand, basically. However, I discovered that Lapras was in my prize cards. So Lapras has the Support Navigation Poké Power, which when you play Lapras from your hand onto your bench, allows you to get a supporter card from your deck. So, since I cannot get Lapras because it's prized, I instead choose to get Ditto Prism Star, which I put onto my bench. Ditto Prism Star has the ability Almighty Evolution, which allows it to evolve into any Stage 1 Pokemon. The catch is that since it's a Prism Star Pokemon, you can only have one in your deck. So, after I do that, I do use Greninja's Conceal Cards ability to discard my Water Energy and draw 2 cards. One of them is Raihan, and the other one is Milcery, which is the basic of Alcremie, so I bench it immediately, and then I end my turn. So, Glacial drew another Ralts, which they put into play immediately. Then they attach basic energy to their active Mr. Mime. And then with Rare Candy, they put Gardevoir into play, which now means that each of their basic Psychic Energy attached to their Psychic Pokemon provides double Psychic Energy. So in particular, they would be able to use Mr. Mime's Cybolt attack, which does 20 damage, and on a coin flip paralyzes the defending Pokemon. However, perhaps they do not realize that they can attack, so they will just pass at the end of this turn. Before they do that, they play an N, which makes each player shuffle their hand into their deck and draw a number of cards equal to the remaining prize cards, so 6 for each of us at this point in the game. Which is quite good for me because, remember, I had 3 Alcremie in hand, which was not ideal. So, with this N, they find a Fog Crystal, with which they get yet another Ralts, which they bench, and then, like I said, they pass their turn without attacking. So, this is what my hand looks like after the N. I first play Buddy-Buddy Poffin, which allows me to get 2 basic Pokemon with 70 HP or less and put them onto my bench. And with that, I just get 1 Baltoy, because I have a Ditto in my hand, which I want to bench. After that, I play Professor's Letter, with which I can get 2 basic energy cards from my deck. I get 2 water energies, one of them gets discarded with the Conceal Cards ability, and the other one will get attached to Ditto. With Conceal Cards, I found Alcremie, which I was able to put into play, evolving my Milcery. And then I just pass my turn. So, Glacial here with Versus Seeker is able to recover N, which then they play immediately, so again, both of us shuffle and draw 6 cards. Then they play a Level Ball, with which they can get a Pokemon with 90 HP or less from their deck into their hand. And with that, they get Alakazam Star, which then gets benched. They then attach another Psychic Energy from hand into Mr. Mime, and this time they do attack with Cybolt, even flipping heads, so my Ditto is paralyzed. So, here is my hand after this N. I choose to attach my Floatstone to my active Pokemon, even though I cannot retreat this turn due to the paralysis, because I want to play Steven's Advice. Steven's Advice allows you to draw a number of cards up to the number of your opponent's Pokemon in play, and the catch is that you cannot play it if you have 7 or more cards, including Steven's Advice, in your hand. So I had 7 cards, which is why I needed to get rid of the Floatstone before playing Steven's Advice. So with that, I'm able to draw 5 cards, because my opponent has 5 Pokemon in play, which is very strong for a draw supporter. Then I play my own Level Ball, with which I grab Claydol, which I then put into play evolving Baltoy. Claydol is arguably the best draw engine in the Eternal format. It has a Poké Power which allows you to choose up to 2 cards from your hand and put them at the bottom of your deck. And then if you do, you can draw cards until you have 6 in your hand. Then at this point I attach my double colorless energy to Alcremie, which would be ready to attack if only it were in the active spot. However, in the active spot there's still a paralyzed Ditto, so I end my turn. Glacial then plays Windstorm, which essentially has the same effect as Field Blower, just with another name. So with that, they discard my Floatstone. Then they attach Psychic Energy from their hand to Alakazam Star. And again they attack with Cybolt, but this time they flip tails, so Ditto is not paralyzed. Since Ditto is not paralyzed, I can just retreat it, so I attach basic water energy to it with the intention to retreat. I then retreat into Alcremie, and then use Claydol's Poké Power. I put 2 Buddy-Buddy Poffin from my hand to the bottom of my deck, since I doubt I will need them, considering that my bench is full and I'm playing against a Mill deck, so none of my Pokemon are gonna get knocked out reasonably. And since I already had 6 cards in hand, I do not draw any. And then I attack with Rainbow Flavor, which, like I said in the intro, will do 370 damage, considering I have a bench Ditto with basic energy attached. However, the damage will be even greater because Mr. Mime has a Psychic Weakness, so the damage is 740, which is quite a big number. I take my prize card, and my opponent promotes Alakazam Star. Then they play Twins. Twins is a supporter card that can only be played when you are behind on prize cards, and you get to search your deck for any 2 cards and put them into your hand. So with this, they grab a Kirlia and an Iono for next turn. Then they attach basic Psychic Energy from their hand to Alakazam Star, and they choose to attach Luxurious Cape to Alakazam Star as well. Luxurious Cape gets the Pokemon that card is attached to plus 100 HP, assuming the Pokemon does not have a rule box. However, it also makes it worth 1 additional prize card if knocked out. Luxurious Cape is in this list because it allows the Pokemon it's attached to have more damage counters on it. Damage counters which are of course put on by Gardevoir EX's ability when the Psychic Energy is accelerated. So after this they retreat into Rals. They use the Refinement ability on this Kirlia, which allows them to discard a card from their hand and draw 2 cards. In particular, they discard this Shaymin. Then they evolve their active into the Mirage Step Kirlia, and they just pass their turn. So here I do not have much to do. I choose to attach my water energy to Radiant Greninja. There are 2 reasons for this. Number 1, Greninja has a 1 retreat cost, so I will be able to retreat it from the active spot if I need to. And number 2, I start working towards the Moonlight Shuriken attack, which can bait my opponent into spending resources trying to put Mr. Mime back into play, since Mr. Mime has the ability Bench Barrier, which would prevent damage done by Radiant Greninja to their bench Pokemon. So after this, I use Claydol's Poké Power, with which I do draw another energy, which I then discard with Radiant Greninja's ability to draw a few more cards. And then I just attack with Rainbow Flavor, knocking out their Kirlia and taking a prize card. My opponent promotes Alakazam Star again, puts Moonlit Heal into play, which would allow them to discard the basic Psychic Energy from their hand, healing 30 damage from each of their Pokemon, which is quite convenient if you have Gardevoir EX in play. Then after that they play Iono, so both of us shuffle our hand and put it to the bottom of our deck, and then Glacial draws 6 cards, whereas I just draw 4, since I have only 4 prizes remaining. With Mysterious Treasure, they're able to discard yet another Psychic Energy to get Gardevoir EX, which will be able to be put into play. With Fog Crystal, they grab Rals. With Level Ball, they grab Ditto from Fire Red and Leaf Green, which I will talk about a bit later. Then Gardevoir EX gets put into play, and starts accelerating a bunch of energy, attaching it to Alakazam Star, which, like I said, can tank 100 damage, which is over its normal HP because of Luxurious Cape. And then they attack with Skill Copy, discarding Swoobat and choosing to copy Jet Woofer, which like I said, discards the top card of my deck for each Psychic Energy attached to this Pokemon. So this Pokemon has 6 basic Psychic Energy cards, which count as 12 energies because of Gardevoir's ability. And so 12 cards got discarded from the top of my deck, which is quite a lot. So I then draw for turn, and I use Claydol's Poké Power again to draw a few more cards. Then I play Korrina, which is a supporter card which allows you to search your deck for a fighting Pokemon and an item card, reveal them, and put them into your hand, and then shuffle your deck. With that, I just get a Rescue Stretcher, which I then use to shuffle some of my Pokemon that were milled earlier back into my deck. Let's see which Pokemon they were. So in the discard I had Claydol, Milcery, and Alcremie, so those 3 go back into my deck. And in particular, I would like to get Claydol into play by evolving Ditto Prism Star. And I do have the means to do that because I have a Level Ball in hand. So now I have 2 Claydol in play. So with I can use my second Claydol to draw a few more cards. And now I attack with Rainbow Flavor, knocking out Alakazam Star, again doing the 740 damage because of weakness. And since Alakazam Star had Luxurious Escape attached, I get to draw 2 prize cards. And my opponent promotes Ditto. Then my opponent puts Kirli into play, which then they use the Refinement ability. With Refinement, they draw a Swoobat and Tapu Lele GX. They then play Tapu Lele GX, which has an ability which has basically the same effect as Lapras' Poké Power from earlier. Lapras is usually the Pokemon with this effect that is played, because it is both a single prizer and searchable with a Level Ball. However, since this deck does run Fog Crystal and Mysterious Treasure, it makes sense to run a Psychic Pokemon even though it gives up 2 prize cards. So with Tapu Lele, they then get Professor Juniper, which basically has the same effect as Professor's Research. Then here comes the Transform Poké Power of Ditto. Transform says, once during your turn, before you attack, you may search your discard pile for a basic Pokemon, excluding any Pokemon level X and Ditto, and switch it with Ditto. Any cards attached to Ditto, damage counters, etc. remain on the new Pokemon, and place Ditto on the discard pile. So with these, they're able to recover Alakazam Star and put it back into play. And then they power it up with Gardevoir EX. However, they can just attach 3 cards because Alakazam Star only has 80 HP as of now. And then they use Skill Copy, discarding the Swoobat and milling 3 times to 6 cards from the top of my deck. So at this point, after I top deck, I only have 9 cards in my deck. However, I do have Guzma in hand, so I am able to win this turn. I use Guzma to cast their Tapu Lele GX into the active spot, and I switch my active with Greninja. I can then just retreat Greninja and knock out Tapu Lele for game. So, Alcremie managed to win this game. It had a bit of a slow start, especially with that opening hand, but my opponent also had quite a slow start, so Alcremie managed to win nonetheless. 2 things I want to say about this deck. First, Alcremie does 370 damage, which, as of recording, basically knockouts instantly any Pokemon that does not have any kind of HP buffing tool attached. However, this will not be true for long, as in just a few months we're gonna get our first Mega Evolution set, with Mega Venusaur EX in particular already known to be 380 HP Pokemon, so it will not get one-shot by Alcremie. Second thing I want to discuss is a comparison between this list and Toxtricity, which is a list that was built by Justin Basil himself. So Toxtricity has an attack that does 50 damage plus 30 more for each type of Pokemon on your bench. And there is a Kecleon which, as long as it has a React Energy attached, has basically all types except Colorless, Darkness, Metal, Fairy, and Dragon. So with this deck, since there are no Dragon Pokemon, assuming you have a full setup, Toxtricity is going to do 350 damage, which is going to be reduced most of the time to 340 because of the effect of Double Rainbow Energy. Anyway, 340 is basically as good as 370 in this current format. So yeah, it's easy to compare the two. Many people, including Justin Basil himself, have said that Alcremie is the better deck compared to Toxtricity. because Alcremie needs less in order to accomplish its full setup. Like, you just have to attach a basic energy to one of your bench Pokemon. Whereas Toxtricity needs to attach a special energy to one of its bench Pokemon, and it has no way of accelerating it. And also on top of that, it also needs to have Meowth and Mr. Mime on its bench. So it is objectively true that Alcremie needs less setup in order to do the full damage. However, assuming Alcremie does not have the full setup, its attack is going to do what? 10 damage, 50 if it has basic water energy attached to something else that is not Ditto. Whereas with Toxtricity, especially if your opponent happens to play Skyfield, you can still bench a lot of types of Pokemon even without having Kecleon's Pokebody active, which will make Toxtricity do a reasonable amount of damage, which is plenty enough in several matchups, like assuming you are not going against 300 HP monsters. So for that reason, I personally think Toxtricity is the better deck, and I do have experience with it as well. So, with that being said, thanks for watching. If you have any comments or questions about the game or the list, feel free to comment below. Thanks again to Glacial for playing this game, and I'll see you next time.